For 33 years, I was the tolerated guest in my own home. "You are not real family," my mother would say. I accepted the cruelty because I thought I was broken. Then I saw the papers, a 25-year-old trust that required my signature to open. It turns out they weren't pushing me away because I was worthless. They were terrified because, on paper, I was the only one who mattered. The letter sat on my kitchen counter like a threat disguised as correspondence. It was heavy, the paper stock thick enough to bruise if you dropped it, and the return address was embossed in a navy blue that looked black under my apartment's cheap fluorescent lights. Thorne, Calloway, and Associates. I did not know them. I did not know anyone who could afford them. I ran my thumb over my own name typed on the front. Ms. Lila Elizabeth Reed. It was rare to see my middle name used. My parents usually forgot it. Or perhaps they just ignored it because it had been my grandmother's name first. Below my name was a reference number that made no sense. It was a string of alphanumeric characters, long and precise, starting with the year of my birth and ending with a code that looked like a banking routing number. I had been expecting a call about the funeral arrangements for days. Grandmother Julianne had passed away on a Tuesday. It was now Friday. I had texted my mother 3 times. I had called my father twice. I had received one text back from my younger sister, Chloe, which simply read, "We are handling it. Please give Mom space." Space, that was the currency of my family. They needed space from me. They needed distance. They needed the air in the room to remain unpolluted by my questions or my presence. I opened the envelope with a serrated knife because I could not find a letter opener. The letter inside was brief. It did not mention a funeral. It did not mention a wake. It requested my physical presence at a family administrative meeting to be held at the Reed residence on Sunday at 2 p.m. The phrasing stuck in my throat. Family administrative meeting, not a gathering, not a memorial, an administration. And then, the sentence that made the hair on my arms stand up. Your attendance is mandatory to satisfy the presence condition of the primary estate review. I put the letter down. I looked at my small, quiet apartment. I had built a life here that was safe. It was modest, but it was mine. I paid my own rent. I bought my own groceries. I did not ask the Reeds for anything because I learned a long time ago that their help came with interest rates I could not afford to pay. But I had loved my grandmother. She was a complicated woman, terrifyingly sharp and often cold, but she had never looked at me with the blank, glazed boredom my parents reserved for me. She had looked at me with scrutiny. She had watched me. I packed a bag. I packed my black dress, the one I wore to interviews, because I did not own funeral clothes. I packed my anxiety, folding it neatly between my sweaters. The drive back to Oakhaven took 3 hours. The landscape shifted from the messy, vibrant sprawl of the city to the manicured silence of the suburbs, and finally to the gated quiet of my hometown. Oakhaven was not just a town, it was a statement. The lawns were not just cut, they were disciplined. The houses were not just large, they were imposing. I pulled my 10-year-old sedan into the driveway of my parents' house. It looked like a scar against the pristine asphalt. My father's luxury SUV and my mother's imported sedan were parked in the garage, visible through the open bay doors, gleaming like they had just been detailed. Chloe's convertible was parked near the front walk, aggressive and bright red. I sat in the car for a full minute, breathing in the recycled air. I rehearsed the greeting. "I am so sorry for your loss. Is there anything I can do?" "Thank you for having me." I walked to the front door. I had a key, but I rang the doorbell. I had learned that lesson when I was 16. Guests ring the bell. Lila. My mother had said when I walked in after school one day while she was entertaining the garden club, "And you are certainly not part of the inner circle today." My father opened the door. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. He looked tired, but in a handsome, distinguished way. "Grief looked good on him, Lila," he said. He did not hug me. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "You made good time. There was no traffic," I said. He nodded. looking past me at my car in the driveway. "You might want to park that on the street. We are expecting the legal team and some of the partners. The driveway needs to be clear." "Of course," I said. I moved the car. When I walked back up the driveway, I felt the familiar shrinkage of my soul. I was 33 years old. I was a senior logistics manager for a shipping firm. I managed a team of 40 people. But here, on this asphalt, I was 12 years old again, being told I was in the way. Inside, the house smelled of lilies and furniture polish. It was silent. My mother was in the sitting room, arranging a tray of crystal water glasses. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes swept over me, cataloging my outfit, my hair, my shoes. "Hello, Lila," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, and completely empty. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I'm so sorry about Grandma." She sighed. A delicate sound. It was expected. She was 92. It was her time. There was no mention of how much I missed her. No question about how I was handling it. My grief was irrelevant. Chloe walked in from the kitchen. She was 28, 5 years younger than me, and she occupied the house with an ownership I had never felt. She was wearing black, but it was fashionable black. Silk, tailored, expensive. "You're here," Chloe said. She sounded exhausted, as if my arrival was one more logistical hurdle she had to clear. I said. "Mom, do we have enough chairs for the firm reps?" Chloe asked. Turning her back to me, "We should," my mother said. "But check the study." I stood in the hallway, holding my bag. "Where should I put my things?" I asked. My mother looked at me, blinking as if she had forgotten I was there. "Oh, the guest room is full of donations we are sorting. You can put your bag in the sewing room. The pull-out couch is fine, isn't it?" The sewing room? It was a windowless closet on the second floor where my mother stored her fabric bolts. "That's fine," I said. I went upstairs. I could hear them talking below me. The tone changed instantly. It became warm, conspiratorial. Mother and daughter, the real family. I sat on the edge of the unmade pull-out couch and stared at the wall. "You are not real family." My father had said it to me when I needed a cosigner for a student loan. "We reserve our credit for the real family. Lila, you have always been independent." My mother had said it when I asked why I wasn't in the family Christmas photo one year. "It's just for the immediate unit. Dear, we don't want to confuse people." I never understood what I was confusing them about. Sunday arrived with a heavy gray sky. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 1:30, the cars started arriving, black sedans, serious men in serious suits. I came downstairs at 10 minutes to 2. The living room had been rearranged. The coffee table was pushed aside. A long folding table had been set up in the center of the room, covered with a white cloth. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his right. Chloe sat to his left. They formed a phalanx. There were 3 other chairs on the opposite side of the table for the attorneys. I looked around. There was no 4th chair. Mr. Vance, the lead attorney, entered the room. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that revealed nothing. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than me. Behind him were 2 associates, younger, carrying boxes of files. Mr. Vance looked at the table. He looked at my parents. Then he looked at me standing by the door. "Ms. Reed?" he asked. "Lila Reed?" "Yes," I said. "Please," he said, gesturing to a small armchair that had been pushed into the corner. "Away from the table, near the bookshelf. If you could take a seat there." I looked at the chair. It was at least 6 feet away from the main table. I was an observer. I was the audience. I walked to the chair and sat down. My hands were cold. My parents did not look at me. Chloe was busy typing on her phone. "Mr. Vance sat down. He opened his briefcase. He did not speak immediately. He took out a single sheet of paper and a heavy fountain pen. He stood up and walked over to me. "Ms. Reed," he said quietly. "Before we begin the administrative reading, I need you to sign this." I looked at the paper. It was not a standard sign-in sheet. At the top, in bold, capitalized letters, it read, Trust presence, verification. Beneath that, a single sentence. I, Lila Elizabeth Reed, confirm my physical presence on this date, at the location of the primary estate, in accordance with the activation clause of the Julianne 5. Reed revocable instrument. What is this? I asked. My father cleared his throat from the table. Just sign it. Lila, we need to get started. It's a formality, my mother added, offering a tight, strained smile. For the records. I looked at Mr. Vance. His eyes were kind but guarded. He held the pen out to me. It was a Mont Blanc. It felt heavy and warm in his hand. It verifies you are here. Mr. Vance said, without your signature on this specific document, we cannot proceed with the reading of the legacy instrument. Legacy instrument? I asked. Just sign the paper. Lila, Chloe snapped, you are holding everyone up. I took the pen. The ink was black and wet. I signed my name. Lila Elizabeth Reed. Mr. Vance watched me write every letter. He waited until I lifted the pen before he nodded. He took the paper and the pen back. He did not say thank you. He walked back to the table, placed the paper in a separate folder, and closed it. He sat down, condition satisfied. He murmured to his associate. My father shifted in his chair. Can we move on to the property distribution? Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses. We will address the visible estate first. This concerns the physical assets, the contents of the home, the vehicle, the jewelry. The meeting proceeded for 45 minutes. It was dry and efficient. My mother inherited the jewelry. My father inherited the house. Chloe was given the car and a collection of antique silverware. I was given nothing. I expected nothing. So it did not hurt. I sat in my corner, watching them. They were animated now. They were discussing logistics, auction houses, appraisals. They were consuming the dead woman's life. Then, Mr. Vance cleared his throat. That concludes the visible estate, he said. Now, we must address the legacy instrument. The room went quiet. My father stiffened. We don't need to do that today, my father said. His voice was sharp. I'm afraid we do. Mr. Vance said, the presence verification has been signed. The timeline is automatic. It's just administrative. My mother said. Her voice was too high. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide and alarming. Lila, you can go now. The rest of this is just tax code boringness. You don't need to stay. I started to stand up. Actually, Mr. Vance said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Ms. Reed needs to remain. Why? I asked. My father slammed his hand on the table. It was a small sound, muffled by the tablecloth, but it was violent, because he likes to bill us by the hour. Lila, sit down or leave. It doesn't matter, Mr. Vance looked at my father. He did not look intimidated. He looked bored. The beneficiary notification requires the presence of all named parties. Beneficiary? I asked. Lila? Chloe said, turning to me with a sneer. Don't get excited. It's probably $500 and a cat. Just sit there and be quiet. Mr. Vance opened a second file. This one was read. This is regarding the Julianne V. Reed Trust, established 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I was 8. My father stood up. We are disputing the validity of that instrument. Vance, you know that. The instrument is valid until a court says otherwise. Mr. Vance said, and currently, the trust is active. My mother reached out and touched my father's arm. Richard, she whispered, not now. My father sat down slowly. He looked at me. For a second, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't the usual disdain. It was fear, pure, unadulterated panic. Mr. Vance continued, the trust is currently in a blind state. The identity of the primary beneficiary is sealed, pending a secondary verification process. However, all parties in this room are named for notification purposes. He looked at me directly. Ms. Reed, you are a named party for notification. Okay, I said. What does that mean? It means, my father interrupted, That Grandma left a mess of paperwork that we have to clean up. It means nothing for you, Mr. Vance ignored him. It means that there will be a second meeting in 14 days. If certain criteria are met, the beneficiary will be unsealed. What criteria? I asked. Mr. Vance closed the folder. That information is privileged to the executor at this stage. My father stood up again. Meeting over. Thank you. Mr. Vance. It was a dismissal. The lawyers packed up. They moved efficiently, like they were evacuating a scene. I stood up. I felt untethered. Lila, my mother said, walking over to me. She put a hand on my arm. Her fingers were cold. Why don't you go pick up some dinner for us? There's that Italian place on Main Street. We're all just so exhausted. She wanted me gone. She wanted me out of the house so they could scream. Sure, I said. I'll go get food. I drove to the Italian place. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the dashboard. Trust presence verification. Why did I have to be there? Why did they need my signature to open a conversation they clearly didn't want to have? When I got back, the house was quiet again. The lawyers were gone. My parents and Chloe were in the kitchen. They stopped talking when I walked in. We ate in silence. That night, the house felt oppressive. The air conditioning was set too low, and the silence felt heavy. I couldn't sleep on the pull-out couch in the sewing room. The fabric bolts looked like looming shadows. I got up and walked down the hallway. I intended to get a glass of water, but I stopped outside my grandmother's old bedroom. The door was ajar. My parents had already started clearing it out. There were boxes stacked against the wall labeled charity and trash. I walked in. The room still smelled like her, lavender and old paper. The bed was stripped. The vanity was empty. I knelt beside the box labeled trash. It was full of old magazines, receipts, and junk mail. My parents were efficient. If it didn't have value, it was garbage. I sifted through the papers, an old calendar, a recipe for sponge cake, a stack of greeting cards, and then, at the bottom of the box, a thick manila envelope. It had been ripped open and tossed aside. I pulled it out. Inside was a photocopy of a document. It looked old. The toner was faded. The Julianne V. Reed Irrevocable Trust. Dated October 14th, 2001. I turned the page. It was dense legal jargon. I scanned the lines, looking for names. Grantor. Julianne V. Reed. Trustee. Colonial First Bank. And then, the section labeled Beneficiary. It was blurred. It looked like someone had moved the paper while copying it. Or perhaps the original had been redacted before this copy was made. I squinted at the smudge. I could make out the first letter of the first name, L, and the middle initial, E, Lila Elizabeth. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the date again, 2001. I was 8 years old, but Chloe's name was Chloe Ann. My mother was Sarah Marie. My father was Richard James. There was no other L.E. in the family. I sat back on my heels, clutching the paper. You are not real family. The words echoed in my head, but they sounded different now. They didn't sound like an insult. They sounded like a defense mechanism. If I was the beneficiary of a trust my parents didn't control, if I held the keys to something they wanted, then treating me like an outsider wasn't just cruelty, it was a strategy. If they made me feel like I didn't belong, I would never look for what belonged to me. I would never ask questions. I would be grateful for scraps. I felt a hot flush of anger rise up my neck. It was followed immediately by a wave of nausea. I wasn't sure. It was just a blurry letter on a piece of trash. I took the paper, I folded it, and put it inside my shirt, against my skin. I went back to the sewing room. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle. The next morning, I waited until my parents went out to meet with the funeral director. Chloe was still asleep. I went out to the back patio and dialed the number on the letterhead I had received. Thorne, Calloway, and Associates. How may I direct your call? This is Lila Reed. I said, I was at the meeting yesterday. One moment. Ms. Reed. The hold music was classical. It played for 2 minutes. Then, Mr. Vance's voice. Ms. Reed, Mr. Vance, I said, I have a question. I am limited in what I can disclose, he said instantly. I found a document. I said, in the trash. It's a photocopy of the trust cover page. Silence. Ms. Reed, he said slowly. You should not be in possession of discarded documents. Is my name on it? I asked. The beneficiary line is blurred. Is it me? I cannot confirm or deny the identity of the beneficiary until the second verification meeting, he said, but I am a named party for notification. I said, you said that yesterday. Yes. Does that mean I am a beneficiary? Or does that mean I am getting $500 and a cat? There was a pause. I heard the sound of a chair shifting. Ms. Reed, Mr. Vance said, and his voice was very low. You are a named party because your status is central to the existence of the trust. That is all I can say. Central to the existence. Okay, I said. Thank you. I hung up. Central. I spent the rest of the day in a fog. I helped my mother sort through linen closets. I nodded when my father complained about the cost of the catering for the wake. I let Chloe make a joke about my shoes. I watched them. I watched them closely. I saw the way my father's hand shook when he poured his coffee. I saw the way my mother kept checking her phone, her eyes darting to the screen every 30 seconds. They were not grieving, they were vibrating with anxiety. Late that night, I went down to the kitchen to get water. I walked softly. I had learned to walk softly in this house a long time ago. Noise attracted attention, and attention was usually negative. I heard voices in the kitchen. It was my father and mother. They were standing near the island, illuminated by the under-cabinet lights. It's a disaster. Richard, my mother hissed. If that trust wakes up, we lose the leverage on the properties. You know how Mom set it up. We can contest it, my father said. He sounded desperate. We can say she was incompetent when she wrote it. She wrote it 25 years ago. She was sharp as a tack. No judge will buy that. Then we settle. My father said, we offer her a payout, a quick cash infusion. She's broke. Sarah. She drives a 10-year-old car. She'll take $50,000 and sign whatever we put in front of her. My mother made a noise of disgust. $50,000? The valuation on the trust assets is in the millions. Richard, if she finds out, she won't find out. My father said, she doesn't know how to read these things. She's never been part of the business. She thinks she's lucky we let her in the front door. I stood in the hallway, pressed against the wall. She thinks she's lucky we let her in the front door. The cruelty was laid bare. It was a tactical, calculated cruelty. They had kept me poor, kept me small, kept me feeling worthless, all so that if this moment ever came, I would be easy to buy off. Does she know what she is? My mother asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. No, my father said. She has no idea. She thinks she's just the mistake. I backed away. I retreated up the stairs. One silent step at a time. I went into the sewing room and locked the door. I sat on the floor, my back against the wood. I wasn't the mistake. I was the heir. And they were going to try to steal it from me. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, not with fear, with a cold, hard clarity. I picked up my phone. I opened a new note. I typed the date. Sunday, October 20th, 2026. They are afraid, and they should be. I closed my eyes. I didn't know the full truth yet. I didn't know why my grandmother had done this, or why she had waited until she died to let me know. But I knew one thing. I was done being the guest. I was going to burn their version of the story to the ground, one signature at a time. The morning sun hit the sewing room floor in a sharp, unforgiving angle. I had slept 3 hours, my body curled into a tight knot on the pull-out couch, listening to the silence of the house. The silence here was different than in my apartment, in the city. Silence was just a pause in the noise. Here, silence felt like someone was holding their breath. I had the photocopy of the trust cover page folded inside my pillowcase. I took it out and smoothed it against the coarse fabric of the sofa. The Julian V. Reed Irrevocable Trust. I needed to know who I was on paper. I opened my laptop. I had a digital file of my vital documents, something I had compiled years ago after a scare with a lost wallet. I pulled up the scan of my birth certificate. Lila Elizabeth Reed. Date of birth, January 12th, 1993. I stared at the screen. Then I opened a folder of old scanned report cards and medical records I had needed for a background check at my logistics job. First grade report card. Lila Reed. Vaccination record. Age 10. Lila Reed. High school transcript. Lila Reed. It wasn't just shorthand. In the box for middle name/initial, my parents had consistently left it blank or drawn a line through it. On my Social Security card application, a copy of which was in my digital file, the middle name field had been typed over with dashes. It looked like a correction, as if Elizabeth was a mistake they were trying to scrub out, but Elizabeth was my grandmother's name. Julianne Elizabeth Reed. Why erase a connection to the matriarch unless you wanted to sever the line of succession? I closed the laptop as I heard footsteps in the hall. They were heavy. My father. He paused outside the sewing room door, then kept walking. I needed an expert, not a lawyer. I couldn't afford one, and I didn't trust anyone in Oak Haven legal circles not to call my father the moment I left their office. I needed someone who understood the mechanics of the paper trail, but had no skin in the game. I thought of Mrs. Gable. Elise Gable had been the town's notary public for 40 years. She had notarized the deed to my first car, a rusty Honda I bought from a neighbor. She had been a friend of my grandmother's, part of a bridge club that dissolved as the members died off one by one. She lived in a small bungalow on the edge of town, the kind of place my parents called distressed, but which was simply old. I got dressed quickly, jeans, a sweater, boots. I slipped out the back door before the kitchen came to life. Mrs. Gable answered her door in a floral housecoat. She was 80, shrinking into herself, but her eyes were bright and hard, like polished stones. "Lila," she said. She didn't smile, but she opened the screen door. "I heard about Julianne. I'm sorry. I didn't go to the house. Your mother makes me tired. She makes everyone tired." I said, "Can I come in?" "I have a question about a document." She let me into her kitchen. It smelled of toast and menthol. We sat at a Formica table. I didn't waste time. I pulled the folded photocopy from my pocket and placed it on the table. "I know this is blurry," I said, "but have you ever seen this reference number? Or this trust structure?" Mrs. Gable put on a pair of thick reading glasses. She leaned over the paper. She traced the alphanumeric string with a liver-spotted finger. She stopped. Her finger hovered over the code. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Her voice had dropped an octave. "I found it in the trash at the house." I said, "It should have been shredded." She said, "What is it?" She sat back, taking off her glasses. She looked out the window at her overgrown garden. "That is a dormant state legacy instrument," she said. "We used to call them ghost trusts. Lawyers don't like them. Banks hate them. Why? Because they are designed to bypass the living generation," she said. She looked at me. "Julianne was a smart woman. Lila. She knew her son. She knew your father has a hole in his hand where money falls through. And she knew your mother would sign anything he put in front of her." I stayed silent. "This number." Mrs. Gable tapped the paper. "The prefix indicates a delayed activation. It's not a normal trust. A normal trust is a bucket of money with a manager. This is a vault with a timer. It sits empty, or appears empty, until 3 conditions are met." "3?" I asked. "Death of the grantor," she said. "That's one. A specific age threshold for the beneficiary. That's usually 25 or 30. I'm 33. I said, "Then you are past the threshold. And the 3rd condition is usually a presence acknowledgement. The beneficiary has to physically show up and sign a ledger to prove they are alive and aware. The attendance sheet." I whispered, "What?" "I signed an attendance sheet yesterday. It was labeled Trust Presence Verification." Mrs. Gable let out a low whistle. "Then it's awake," she said. "The ghost is walking. What does that mean for me?" I asked. If I am the beneficiary. She looked at me with pity. It means you're about to become very unpopular. If that trust is what I think it is, it locks the assets. Your parents can't sell. They can't borrow against. And they can't transfer anything held inside it. They are frozen out until the beneficiary decides what to do. She pushed the paper back to me. Be careful, Lila, she said. Money makes people do ugly things. But money that was promised and then snatched away? That makes people dangerous. I drove back to the house with a pit in my stomach. The ghost was walking, and I had woken it up with a Mont Blanc pen. When I walked into the kitchen, the atmosphere was jarring. Usually, the morning air in the Reed house was thick with tension, and the sharp clatter of my mother frantically cleaning things that were already clean. Today, it smelled like vanilla and bacon. My mother was at the stove. My father was sitting at the island, reading a tablet. Chloe was actually sitting with them, drinking a smoothie. Lila, my mother said. She turned, a spatula in her hand. Her smile was bright, wide, and did not reach her eyes. We were just waiting for you. I made those pancakes you used to like, the ones with the blueberries. I haven't eaten pancakes since I was 12, I said, but I walked over. Sit down, my father said. He pulled out a stool. Coffee? I sat down. The sudden warmth was more unsettling than the coldness. It felt like a stage play. Thanks, I said. My mother put a plate in front of me. It was piled high. It looked like a photograph of a happy family breakfast. We were talking, my father said, putting down his tablet, about how hard this week has been. For everyone. It has, I said, and we know we haven't always been the most communicative family. He continued. He picked up his coffee cup, but losing Mom makes you realize what's important. Keeping the peace. Keeping things simple. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He slid it across the marble counter. Mom wanted you to have this, he said. I opened the box. Inside was a small pearl brooch. I recognized it. Grandmother used to wear it to church. It wasn't her most expensive piece. My mother had already claimed the diamonds and the emeralds. But it was real. It's beautiful. I said, we want you to feel included, my mother said. She was leaning against the counter, watching me closely. We know you felt separate yesterday, with the lawyers. It was a little strange. I admitted. Well, that's just legal nonsense, my father said. He waved a hand dismissively. Vance is a vulture. He loves to complicate things to drive up his fees. He's talking about second meetings and verifications. It's all just billable hours. He laughed. A short, dry sound. So, we thought we could save everyone the trouble, he said. We spoke to our own counsel this morning. Since we are all here, and we all agree that the family should stay united, we can just handle the administrative stuff ourselves. He reached under the counter and pulled out a sleek leather folder. He opened it and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. Right next to the pancakes. It's a standard family settlement statement, he said. It just says that we, the surviving family, agree to distribute the assets according to the standard will, the house to me, the small items to the grandkids, and we waive any complicated, old legacy clauses that might hold things up. I looked at the paper. It was dense text. I saw the words waive, release, and forever discharge. It releases any claims to trusts or side instruments, my father said casually. It just lets us close the estate today. No more meetings, no more stress. And, he paused, and we can cut you a check today for $20,000 from the estate to help with your situation. My situation? I asked. You know, my mother said, your rent, that car. We want to help you. Lila, $20,000. It was more money than I had in my savings account. It could pay off my student loans. It could fix my car. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at the pearl brooch. It was a trade. The pearl and the check for my signature. I looked at the bottom of the document. By signing this, the undersigned waives any and all rights to the Julianne V. Reed Irrevocable Trust and agrees to the immediate dissolution of said instrument. They knew. They absolutely knew. I pushed the plate of pancakes away. I can't sign this, I said. The room stopped. My mother's smile froze. Chloe stopped drinking her smoothie. Why not? My father asked. His voice dropped. It's free money. Lila, it's a waiver. I said, it waives my rights to the trust. The trust is a husk. My father said, it's empty. It's just paperwork. Then let the lawyers close it. I said, if it's empty, it doesn't matter if I wait for the meeting. My father's face turned a shade of red I remembered from my childhood, the color of suppressed rage. We are trying to be nice to you, he said. We are trying to include you. You are trying to buy me. I said, I stood up. I don't want the 20,000. And I don't want to sign anything until Mr. Vance explains what Condition 2 is. Condition 2 is a fantasy, my father snapped. He stood up too. He was tall, looming over me. You are being selfish, my mother said. Her voice trembled, just like always, disrupting everything. I picked up the velvet box. I took the brooch out and put it on the counter. I don't want this either. Lila, sign the paper, Chloe said. She sounded bored, but her hand was gripping her glass tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Stop being dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I said, I'm being careful. My father slammed his hand on the counter. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. You are not real family, he shouted. The mask was gone. The handsome, grieving son was gone. This was the man who had looked at me with contempt my entire life. You are a biological technicality. You have no right to this money. It is Reed money. It belongs to the people who built this life, not the one who ran away to live in a shoebox. The words hung in the air. Not real family. I looked him in the eye. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. If I am not real family, I said, my voice steady, then why does the trust require my signature to open? My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at me. He looked like a man who had reached for a weapon and found his holster empty. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I walked out the front door. I got in my car. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to wait 2 minutes before I could put the key in the ignition. I drove. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just needed to be away from the vanilla scent of their lies. I found myself driving toward the county administration building. It was a brutalist concrete block in the center of the county seat, about 20 miles away. I needed facts. Mrs. Gable had said the trust locked assets. I wanted to know what assets. I parked and went into the records clerk's office. It was quiet, smelling of dust and floor wax. Can I help you? The clerk asked. She was a young woman with bright blue braids. I need to look up the deed history on a property. I said, it belonged to my grandmother, Julianne Reed. I gave her the address of the old commercial building my grandmother had owned downtown. It used to be a bakery, then a boutique. I thought my parents had sold it years ago. The clerk typed on her keyboard. Here it is. It was transferred in 2018. Transferred to who? I asked. A company called R.J. Ventures, LLC. She said, R.J. Richard James. My father. Can I see the transfer deed? She printed it out. I paid the $2 for the copy. I took it to a wooden table in the corner. I looked at the document. Quitclaim deed. Grantor. Julianne V. Reed. Grantee. R. J. Ventures. LLC. Consideration. $10. My grandmother had given a building worth $500,000 to my father's shell company for $10. But my grandmother had been sharp in 2018. She had complained to me about my father's business sense constantly. He couldn't sell water in a desert. She had told me, why would she give him her prime asset? I looked at the signature line. Julianne V. Reed. The signature was shaky. Then I looked at the witness line. Witness, Lila Reed. I stared at it. The signature was a looping, cursive script. It looked like mine. It had the same flourish on the L, the same sharp D on the end. I looked at the date. November 14th, 2018. November 14th. I closed my eyes. November 2018. I was 25. I was in graduate school in Chicago. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled back through my digital calendar. which I had synced from my old student account. November 14th, 2018, 10 a.m., macroeconomics midterm, 2 p.m., study group, library, 6 p.m., shift at coffee shop. I was 400 miles away on the day I supposedly witnessed this deed. I hadn't been in Oakhaven that entire autumn. Someone had forged my signature. Not just someone, my parents. They needed a witness who wouldn't ask questions. Or perhaps they needed a family member to validate the gift to avoid tax scrutiny. So they just signed my name. They stole my identity to steal my grandmother's building. I sat there, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A cold sweat broke out on my back. Then the doubt started, the spiral. Did I come home? Did I forget? Maybe I drove down for a weekend? Stress does strange things to memory. Maybe I signed a stack of papers for them once and didn't look at what they were? No. A voice in my head whispered, "That is what they want you to think." That was the trap. That was how they had controlled me for decades. You remember it wrong. Lila, you are always so emotional. Lila, you are imagining things. Lila, they had gaslit me so effectively that I was sitting here, looking at proof of a felony, and wondering if I was the crazy one. I looked at the signature again. The pressure was even. When I sign, I press hard on the downstrokes. This was light. It was a tracing, or a practice run. I felt sick. This wasn't just about being the black sheep. This was criminal fraud. I left the records office. I walked to my car, but I didn't get in. I stood in the parking lot, breathing the cold air. I couldn't go back to the house, but I had to. My things were there, and if I ran now, they would win. They would say I was unstable. They would say I disappeared. My phone buzzed. A text message. "Meet me at the old playground. 10 minutes. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated. Then I got in the car. The playground was a rusted metal structure near the edge of the neighborhood. It was empty. A car was parked there. A silver sedan. Dave, my sister's husband, was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. He looked nervous. He was a quiet man, an accountant who always seemed to be trying to shrink into the furniture when the Reeds were arguing. I pulled up next to him. I rolled down the window. "Dave?" He threw the cigarette on the ground and stomped on it. He walked over to my window. He didn't look at me. He looked at the trees. "I can't be here long," he said. "Chloe thinks I'm getting gas. What is it?" I asked. "I heard the fight this morning," he said. "About the waiver." "Yeah, it was loud." "Lila," he said, finally looking at me. His face was pale. "There's a box." "What box?" "In their closet. Your parents' closet. Top shelf, behind the winter coats. It's a metal file box. It's locked. But the key is in your dad's sock drawer. Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's labeled Lila. Medical," he said, "but it's heavy. And last Thanksgiving, when everyone was drunk, your dad made a joke to your mom. He said, 'As long as the box stays shut, the girl stays quiet.'" I stared at him. "Why help me?" I asked. "You're one of them," he grimaced. "Chloe. Chloe is getting worse. She's becoming them, and if they can do whatever they did to you, they can do it to me. Or our kids. If we have them." He looked at his watch. "I have to go. Don't tell them I talked to you." He got in his car and drove away. I sat there for a long time. Lila. Medical. I wasn't going to break into their closet. Not yet. That was breaking and entering. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to be the thing they didn't believe I was. Capable. I drove back to the house. It was late afternoon. My parents' cars were gone. Probably at the funeral home or meeting with their damage control lawyers. I went to the sewing room. I packed my bag. I wasn't going to stay in this house another night. I would book a motel on the highway, but before I left, I took out a notebook. I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote, "Goal. I do not want their money. I do not want their approval. I want the truth. 1. Prove I did not sign the deed. 2. Find out what is in the trust. 3. Stop letting them define who I am." I looked at the words. They felt solid. They felt real. My phone chimed. An email notification. Subject: Beneficiary status update. Estate of J. Read. From Vance, Arthur, Thorne, Calloway, and Associates. My thumb hovered over the screen. I opened it. Dear Ms. Reed, please be advised that the initial review of the presence verification and the timeline audit has been completed. Condition 1, grantor death. Satisfied. Condition 2, beneficiary verification. Satisfied. This email serves as formal notice that the Julianne V. Reed Trust has entered the disclosure phase. A mandatory meeting for all named parties is scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. at our offices. Attendance is required to unlock the asset schedule. Regards, Arthur Vance, Esquire, Condition 2 satisfied. I looked at the empty room. I looked at the box of fabric scraps my mother kept, remnants of projects she never finished. I wasn't a remnant, I was the condition. I walked downstairs. The house was still empty. I left my key on the kitchen counter, right next to the unsigned waiver and the pearl brooch. I walked out the door and closed it firmly behind me. I didn't slam it, I just closed it. The sound echoed like a gavel. I spent the night at a motel called The Pines. Located 3 miles off the interstate, the room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale cigarette smoke, a scent that clung to the polyester bedspread. I did not sleep. I spent the hours between midnight and dawn staring at the popcorn ceiling, replaying the image of my signature on a deed I had never seen, witnessing a transfer I had never authorized. By 9 a.m. on Thursday, I was dressed in the same black dress I had worn to the first meeting. I had steamed the wrinkles out using the motel shower. I drank black coffee from a styrofoam cup and drove to the offices of Thorne, Calloway, and Associates. The law firm was housed in a brick building that looked like a fortress. It was designed to intimidate. It whispered of old money, quiet settlements, and the kind of power that did not need to raise its voice. My parents were already there. Their car was parked in the front spot. Chloe's red convertible was next to it. I parked my 10-year-old sedan at the far end of the lot. I took a breath. The air was cold, biting at my exposed ankles. I do not want their money. I do not want their approval. I want the truth. I repeated the mantra as I walked to the glass doors. The receptionist looked up as I entered. She was young, efficient, and did not smile. Ms. Reed, she said, they are waiting for you in conference room B. I walked down the hallway. The carpet was thick enough to silence my footsteps. The walls were lined with oil paintings of men I did not know, partners long dead, staring down with judgment. I opened the door to conference room B. It was a smaller room than the last one, more intimate, more claustrophobic. My parents sat on one side of a mahogany table. Chloe sat next to them, scrolling on her phone, looking bored but tense. Mr. Vance sat at the head of the table, but there was someone else, seated next to Mr. Vance was a woman I had never seen before. She was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair cut into a sharp bob. She wore a charcoal suit that looked tailored to the millimeter. She had no notes in front of her, only a glass of water and a pair of reading glasses resting on the table. Lila, my father said. His voice was tight. He did not look at me. He looked at a point just past my left ear. You're late. It is 10 o'clock exactly, I said. Please, take a seat. Mr. Vance said. I sat in the chair opposite my family. The distance across the table felt like a canyon. Mr. Vance cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming, he said. As stated in my email, the Julianne V. Reed Trust has entered the disclosure phase. However, before we proceed to the asset schedule, there is a procedural change. He gestured to the woman beside him. This is Ms. Sterling, he said. She is the trust protector. My father frowned. The what? The trust protector. Mr. Vance repeated. It is a special role designated by the grantor, while I serve as the trustee's legal representative. Ms. Sterling is an independent fiduciary appointed to ensure that the grantor's specific intent is carried out. She has the power to veto distributions, remove trustees, and in this case, verify the beneficiary. Ms. Sterling turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were a piercing pale blue. They were not unkind, but they were surgically precise. "Good morning, Ms. Reed," she said. Her voice was low and calm. "Good morning." I said, "Ms." Sterling turned to my parents. "And Mr. S. and Mrs. Reed. I understand this process is stressful. However, my role is to ensure that Julianne's voice is heard clearly, without interference." My mother offered a fluttering, nervous smile. "Of course, we just want what is best for the family. That is what Mother would have wanted." "Ms." Sterling did not smile back. She opened a thin leather folio. "Before we can unseal the assets," she said, "I must conduct a non-standard identity verification." My father scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You know who she is." "She is our daughter. We are sitting right here. Standard identification is sufficient for standard trusts." "Ms." Sterling said, "this is not a standard trust. It contains specific clauses regarding substitution and identity suppression. Therefore, I must ask Ms. Lila Reed 3 questions drawn from sealed records." She looked at me. "Lila, please answer to the best of your ability." I nodded. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Question 1. Ms." Sterling said, "On the 14th of January, 1993, 2 days after your birth, you were transferred from the maternity ward to a different facility for a period of 48 hours. What was the name of that facility?" The room went dead silent. I blinked. I had no memory of this. Obviously, I was 2 days old, but I remembered seeing the name on the old medical records I had scanned for my background check, the ones where my middle name had been crossed out. "St. Jude's Specialist Center?" I said. My mother made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a hiccup. "Correct, Ms." Sterling said. She did not look at my mother. Question 2. Who signed the discharge papers from St. Jude's? I thought back to the scan. It was a messy signature. "My grandmother." I said, "Julianne Reed." My father shifted in his chair. The leather creaked loudly. "This is irrelevant trivia," he snapped. "What does this prove?" "It proves access to truth." "Ms." Sterling said calmly. Question 3. On your 10th birthday, your grandmother opened a savings account in your name at a bank that no longer exists. What was the name of the bank? I remembered that day. It was one of the few birthdays where I felt seen. We had gone to the bank together. She had given me a passbook. My parents had made me close the account a week later, claiming it complicated their taxes. First Mutual of Oakhaven. I said, "Ms." Sterling closed the folio. Verification complete. She folded her hands on the table. "The reason for these specific questions," she said, addressing the room, "is that the trust was established with a singular protective purpose. Julianne Reed foresaw a scenario where the beneficiary might be subject to coercion, substitution, or reputational manipulation." The words hung in the air. Coercion, substitution, reputational manipulation. It felt like she was reading a summary of my life. My father laughed. It was a harsh, forced sound. Reputational manipulation? That sounds like paranoia. Mother was getting old. She watched too many soap operas. The trust was drafted 25 years ago. "Mr. Reed." "Mrs." Sterling said. She was 67. She was not paranoid. She was observant. She turned back to me. "The trust language is explicit. It states that the assets are to be held for the real heir, defined not by parental preference, but by the specific lineage of the grandmother's intent. It was designed to bypass the intermediate generation, you, Mr. and Mrs. Reed, specifically because the grantor feared you would attempt to absorb the beneficiary's identity for your own gain." My mother stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the floor. "I will not sit here and be insulted," she cried. Her face was blotchy. "We have loved Lila. We have supported her. We let her live in our house." "And you charged me rent," I said quietly. My mother froze. "I paid you $400 a month from the time I was 16 until I left for college." I said, "You called it a responsibility tax. That was to teach you value." My mother shouted, "Ms." Sterling raised a hand. It was a small gesture, but it silenced the room. "We are not here to litigate parenting styles," she said. "We are here to execute a legal instrument, and there is a specific clause I need to address regarding the events of the last 48 hours. She pulled out a sheet of paper. Clause 7A. She read, "If any party attempts to force, coerce, or manipulate the beneficiary into signing a waiver, release, or settlement agreement regarding this trust prior to the full disclosure meeting, such action shall be considered a hostile act against the estate." She looked up. "Mr. Vance informed me that a family settlement statement was presented to the beneficiary yesterday." My father's face went gray. It was a draft." He stammered. "We were just discussing options. We didn't make her sign it. Did you offer a financial incentive?" Ms. Sterling asked. "No," my mother said quickly. "Yes," I said. "They offered me $20,000. Ms. Sterling nodded. She looked at Mr. Vance. "Please note for the record that the penalty clause has been activated." She said. "What does that mean?" Chloe asked. She looked nervous now. She had put her phone down. "It means," Ms. Sterling said, "that any bequest left to Richard and Sarah Reed in the primary will is now subject to a lien in favor of the trust. Essentially, the trust now has a claim on the house and the personal assets of the parents, to ensure the beneficiary is made whole if there has been any other theft." My father slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do that. That house is mine." "It is part of the estate, Mr. Vance corrected gently, "and the estate is now under audit because of your attempt to bypass the trust." I sat very still. I watched them. They were unraveling. The polite mask of the Oakhaven elite was dissolving, revealing the desperate, greedy people underneath. But why? I asked. Why was the trust created? Where did the money come from? Grandma wasn't rich. She was a teacher. Ms. Sterling looked at me. Her expression softened. "Just a fraction. That is the public story," she said. "The truth is that 25 years ago, your grandmother was the plaintiff in a wrongful termination lawsuit against a major pharmaceutical company. She had been a research archivist. She found things they wanted hidden. They fired her. She sued. I stared at her. I never knew that. She won." Ms. Sterling said, "It was a quiet settlement, a very large settlement. She signed a non-disclosure agreement, which is why she never spoke of it. But she took that money and she put it into this trust. She didn't want it to be family savings. She didn't want it to be used for cars or renovations. She wanted it to be an exit strategy. For who?" I asked. "For the person she believed would need it most." Ms. Sterling said, "She saw the dynamic in your family. Lila, even when you were 8, she saw how you were treated. She saw how your parents utilized you." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back. Utilized. I whispered, "Mr. Vance opened a file. "We have done a preliminary forensic accounting," he said. "It appears there is a correlation between the trust's dormant years and your parents' business activities." He slid a graph across the table. "Your parents' company, Reed Logistics, expanded significantly in 2005, 2010, and 2018, he said. 2018. I said, "That was the year of the building transfer." Mr. Vance nodded. "We believe your parents may have used the existence of the trust, without accessing the funds directly, to secure loans. They used your future inheritance as collateral, essentially borrowing against a promise that they would eventually control you." My father stood up. "We need a recess," he announced. "We need to speak to our counsel, and we need to speak to the protector privately." Ms. Sterling did not move. Request denied. "What?" my father snapped. "I do not speak privately with parties who have triggered a penalty clause," she said. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of the beneficiary." My father looked at the door. He looked like he wanted to run. "We are leaving," he said. "Come on, Sarah, Chloe." Chloe didn't move. "I'm staying," she said. "Chloe," my mother hissed. "I want to know if I'm losing my car." Chloe said. She looked at me. "Lila, tell them not to take my car." I looked at my sister. For the first time, I didn't see the golden child. I saw a hostage who had been bought with trinkets. I can't promise anything. Chloe, I said. My parents stood by the door, vibrating with rage and impotence. Sit down, Richard. Ms. Sterling said. Her voice was like a whip. If you leave this room, I will interpret it as a refusal to cooperate, and I will move to freeze your personal bank accounts by noon. My father sat down. He looked defeated. He looked small. Ms. Sterling turned back to me. Lila, she said, we are at a crossroads. The verification is technically complete. However, there is one final component before we transfer control of the assets to you. What is it? I asked. Your grandmother left a sealed letter of intent. Ms. Sterling said. She held up a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. It is addressed to you. It explains the history. It explains why she made the choices she did regarding your identity. My mother made a sound. It was a word, but it was strangled. No, she whispered. We all looked at her. She was pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her fingernails were colorless. Please, my mother whispered. Her eyes were fixed on the envelope. Don't read that. Why? I asked. Because, she faltered. Because it's cruel. She was a cruel woman. Lila. She just wants to hurt us from the grave. Ms. Sterling ignored her. She looked at me. Lila. She said, I must warn you. This letter contains sensitive information regarding your history, your medical history, your legal standing in this family. She paused. If you proceed, she said gently, you may learn things you cannot unlearn. The narrative you have of your life, even the painful one, is familiar. The truth may destroy whatever relationships you have left with these people. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at the floor. My mother was weeping silently, terrified tears. Chloe was watching me with wide, fearful eyes. Relationships you have left. I thought about the breakfast, the pancakes, the pearl brooch, the waiver. I thought about the Lila, medical box in the closet. I thought about the signature that wasn't mine on the deed. I didn't have relationships. I had hostage negotiations. I realized then that I wasn't looking for a victory. I wasn't looking to stand on the table and shout. I was grieving. I was mourning the hope that one day, if I was good enough, or successful enough, or quiet enough, they would finally love me. That hope was the thing that had kept me trapped. I looked at Ms. Sterling. I want to read it, I said. Ms. Sterling nodded. She did not hand me the letter immediately, because of the allegations of forgery regarding the property deed you discovered. She said, and because of the activation of the penalty clause, we need to formalize the next step. She pushed a document toward me. This is an authorization for a forensic document examination, she said, and this, she pushed a second paper, is a subpoena for the full, unredacted archival records from St. Jude's Specialist Center. My father looked up. His eyes were dead. You're going to dig it all up, he said. His voice was flat. I picked up the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint this time. Not a Mont Blanc. It felt fitting. This wasn't a ceremony. It was an autopsy. I'm not digging it up. Dad, I said, I signed the first paper. Then the second. I'm just turning on the lights. Ms. Sterling took the papers. Thank you. We will have the results in 48 hours. The final reading of the letter of intent will take place then. She stood up. The meeting is adjourned. My parents bolted. They didn't wait for Chloe. They didn't look at me. They scrambled out of the room as if the building was on fire. Chloe stood up slowly. She looked at me across the table. You know they're going to blame you, she said, for everything. I know. I said, Are you really going to take the house? She asked. I don't know. Chloe? I said, I just want to know who I am. She nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she just grabbed her purse and followed our parents. I was left alone in the room with Mr. Vance and Miss Sterling. The silence was heavy. You did well, Miss Sterling said. She was placing the sealed letter back into her folio. I don't feel well, I said. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That is a normal reaction to the deconstruction of a reality, she said. She walked around the table and stood next to me. She didn't touch me. She wasn't a hugger, but her presence was solid. Your grandmother loved you. Lila, she said, she loved you enough to build a weapon and hide it until you were strong enough to wield it. I looked at the empty chairs where my parents had sat. Why didn't she just tell me? I asked. Why leave it in a box? Because, Ms., Sterling said, looking at the door where my family had fled. She knew that as long as you thought you needed them, you would never let yourself be free. She had to wait until they showed you exactly who they were, and they had. They had shown me with a waiver and a check for $20,000. Go back to your motel. Ms., Sterling said, lock the door. Do not answer their calls. We will see you in 2 days. I walked out to the parking lot. The wind had picked up. I sat in my car. I watched the building for a moment. I thought about the question Ms. Sterling had asked. Question 1. On the 14th of January, you were transferred. Street. Jude's Specialist Center. I pulled out my phone. I typed St. Jude's Specialist Center into the search bar. The results loaded. It wasn't a hospital. Not exactly. St. Jude's Center for Genetic Verification and Surrogacy Law. I stared at the screen. Surrogacy. I looked at my birth certificate in my mind. Lila Elizabeth Reed. I looked at the memory of my mother saying, "You are not real family." The pieces were floating in the air, jagged and sharp. I couldn't fit them together yet, but the picture they were forming was terrifying. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. "We need to talk. Just us. Please, don't let them ruin us." I deleted the thread. I blocked the number. I put the car in gear and drove toward the highway. I wasn't going back to the motel to sleep. I was going to buy a new lock for my door, and then I was going to wait for the truth to trigger. The 48 hours of waiting felt less like time and more like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I stayed in the motel room. I ordered food delivery and asked them to leave it at the door. I didn't turn on the TV. I sat by the window, watching the highway traffic, feeling the vibration of the trucks in the glass. My phone was a brick of silence. I had blocked my parents, but I hadn't blocked Chloe. She hadn't texted. That silence was louder than any screaming argument. I spent the time reviewing the few documents I had, the trust presence verification, the quitclaim deed copy. I zoomed in on the witness signature on the deed again, Lila Reed. I looked at the loops, the pressure points. I had taken a calligraphy class in college, an impulse elective because I wanted to learn something beautiful. I remembered the instructor talking about muscle memory. You can fake the shape of a letter, he had said, but you can't fake the rhythm of the hand. The L in the forged signature hesitated at the top of the loop. There was a microscopic blot of ink there, where the pen had paused. I didn't pause. My L was one fluid motion. Whoever wrote this had been looking at a sample of my signature and drawing it, not writing it. On Saturday morning, I woke up with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. Today was the day. I drove to the law firm. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain. When I arrived, the dynamic had shifted again. The receptionist nodded to me with something that looked like respect, or perhaps fear. "Ms. Reed, they are in the main boardroom today." The main boardroom. We had been promoted. I walked in. The room was vast, dominated by a table that could seat 20. My parents were there, but they weren't alone. Sitting next to my father was a man in a cheap suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Sitting next to my mother was nobody. She looked isolated, shrinking into her cashmere cardigan. Chloe was there, but she was sitting near the window, away from them, and on the other side of the table, flanked by Mr. Vance and Miss Sterling, was a man with a magnifying loop around his neck and a stack of charts. "Lila." "Ms." Sterling said, "Please sit." I took the chair at the head of the table, the power position. I hadn't chosen it consciously, but it was the only one left. "We have the results of the forensic examination," Ms. Sterling said without preamble. She gestured to the man with the loop. "This is Mr. Henderson. He is a certified forensic document examiner." Mr. Henderson stood up. He didn't look at the people. He looked at his charts. I have analyzed the questioned document, the quitclaim deed dated November 14th, 2018, and compared it with known exemplars of Ms. Lila Reed's signature from the same period. He held up a large board. On it were blown-up images of signatures. This top signature is the questioned signature, he said, pointing to the shaky Lila Reed. These bottom three are from Ms. Reed's student ID, a lease agreement, and a credit card receipt from 2018. He tapped the top image. Note the hesitation mark at the apex of the L. He said, "This is a characteristic of drawing, not writing." The writer paused to check their position. Furthermore, the pressure distribution is uniform. Natural writing has variations in pressure. Heavy on downstrokes, light on upstrokes. This line is flat. He looked at my father. It is my professional opinion, with a high degree of certainty, that the witness signature is a simulation. It is a forgery. The word hung in the room. Forgery. My father didn't speak. He was staring at the table. Ms. Sterling turned to the man in the cheap suit sitting next to my father. "And you are Mr. Tenney?" she asked. The man jumped. "Yes, I was the notary on that deed. Mr. Tenney? Miss..." Sterling said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did Lila Reed appear before you on November 14th, 2018? Mr. Tenney looked at my father. My father didn't look up. Mr. Tenney looked at me. He looked terrified. I don't recall the specific day. He stammered. It was a long time ago. Richard. Mr. Reed brought the papers in. He said his daughter was in the car, feeling sick, and had already signed it. I've known Richard for 20 years. I didn't think... So you notarized a signature you did not witness? Mr. Vance asked. It's common practice in small towns. Mr. Tenney trailed off. It is a felony, Mr. Vance said, and it voids the transfer. He turned to my father. Mr. Reed, the transfer of the commercial building to R.J. Ventures is null and void. The property reverts to the estate immediately, and since the estate is now subject to the trust's penalty lien, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. My father finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. It was a business decision, he said hoarsely. We needed the equity. The business was drowning. Mother wouldn't help us. She sat on that pile of money and watched us struggle. So you stole it. I said, I borrowed it, he shouted. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. You stole my name. I said, you made me an accomplice to fraud. He looked at me with pure hatred. You? What do you care? You were off playing student. You didn't care about the family business. You didn't care about keeping this family afloat. You were always separate. Because you made me separate, I yelled back. My voice cracked. Ms. Sterling stood up. That brings us to the final piece of evidence, she said. She picked up the sealed letter of intent. She looked at my mother. Mrs. Reed, do you want to leave the room? My mother looked up. She looked like a ghost. No, she whispered. Read it. Let her know. Let her know she really isn't one of us. I felt a cold chill go down my spine. Ms. Sterling broke the wax seal. The crack sounded like a bone snapping. She pulled out 3 pages of handwritten text. To my granddaughter, Lila Elizabeth. She began reading. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the truth has finally outpaced the lies. You have spent your life wondering why you felt like a guest in your own family, why your parents treated you with a coldness they could not hide, why you felt like an obligation. The answer is simple, and it is terrible. You are not their daughter. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. You are my daughter. I stopped breathing. Ms. Sterling continued reading, her voice steady. I was 42 when I became pregnant with you. It was a scandal. I was a widow. Your father, my son, was already married to Sarah. They were trying to conceive and failing. It was a source of great shame for them in our community. When I found out I was expecting, Richard and Sarah came to me with a proposition. They proposed a private adoption. They would raise you as their own. They would cover the scandal. They would get the child they wanted, and I would avoid the embarrassment of a late-life pregnancy. I agreed. It is the greatest regret of my life. I gave birth to you at St. Jude's. I signed the papers. I watched them take you home, but I watched them closely. I saw that they did not love you as a daughter. They resented you. Sarah resented you because you were proof of her own infertility. Richard resented you because you were his sister, a complication, a living reminder of a messy reality. They treated you like an outsider because, to them, you were one. You were the aunt they had to raise. I tried to intervene, but I had signed away my rights, so I did the only thing I could. I built this trust. I put my settlement money into it. And I locked it so that it would only open when I died, ensuring that they could not touch it, and that you would finally have the resources to escape them. They are not your parents, Lila. They are your brother and sister-in-law. You are a Reed. You are my heir. You are the only real thing in this family. Love, Mom, Ms. Sterling put the letter down. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. I looked at Richard, my father, my brother. I looked at Sarah, my mother, my sister-in-law. I looked at Chloe, my niece. Chloe was staring at me, her mouth open. You're my aunt? I looked at Richard. Is it true? I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Richard stared at the table. It was for the best, he muttered. It was the 90s. People talked. We gave you a home. You gave me a cage, I said. Sarah was crying into her hands. We tried. She sobbed. We tried to love you, but you looked so much like her. You looked exactly like Julianne. Every time I looked at you, I saw her judging me. So you punished me. I said, you punished a child for existing. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I picked up the letter. I held it against my chest. I turned to Ms. Sterling. What happens now? I asked. Ms. Sterling looked at Richard and Sarah with a gaze that could have frozen lava. Now, she said, the trust is fully active. The assets, including the house, the commercial building, and the investment portfolio, are under your sole control. She paused, and because of the penalty clause and the proven fraud regarding the deed, I am filing a motion to remove Richard Reed as executor of the visible estate. Richard looked up, panic flaring in his eyes. You can't do that. I can. Ms. Sterling said, and I will. She looked at me. Lila. She said, it is your decision. You own the house they live in. You own the building their business operates out of. You hold the debt they generated by forging your name. I looked at them. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They were not the giants who had ruled my life. They were just two scared people who had built a life on a foundation of lies. And the foundation had just crumbled. I looked at Chloe. She looked terrified. I'm not like them, Chloe whispered. Lila, please, I didn't know. I looked at Richard. Get out, I said. He blinked. What? Get out of my house. I said, Lila, be reasonable. He started. I am being reasonable. I said, I'm giving you 24 hours to vacate, which is 24 hours more than you would have given me. Where will we go? Sarah wailed. I don't know. I said, maybe you can find a guest room somewhere. Maybe you can pay a responsibility tax. I turned to Mr. Vance. Start the eviction process, I said, and file the fraud charges for the deed. Lila, Richard shouted, you're sending your own family to jail? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me, over and over, that I wasn't real family. I held up the letter. I don't have a family. I said, I have an estate. I walked out of the boardroom. I walked out of the fortress. I walked into the rain. It was pouring now, soaking my dress, plastering my hair to my face. I stood in the parking lot and looked up at the gray sky. I was alone, truly, completely alone. But for the first time in 33 years, I knew exactly who I was. I was Lila Elizabeth Reed, daughter of Julianne, and I was finally real. The waiting was not a passive act, it was a physical state, heavy and suffocating, like wearing a wool coat in August. I spent the next 4 days in the motel room at the Pines, a place that smelled of lemon polish and desperation. I did not go back to my parents' house. I did not go to work. I called my boss and told him I had a family emergency, which was the most honest lie I had ever told. My phone became a grenade I was afraid to touch. My parents had shifted tactics. The silence of the first day broke on the second, replaced by a barrage of digital noise that oscillated wildly between affection and aggression. Mom, Lila, honey, please come home. We are so worried about you. Dad didn't mean what he said. He is just grieving. 2 hours later, Dad, you are making a mistake. You are listening to people who only want to bill hours. We are your family. Pick up the phone. 3 hours later, Mom, I found that old photo of us at the beach. You were so happy then. We were so happy. Don't throw that away for money. Attached was a grainy scan of a photograph. Me, age 7, sitting on a towel, squinting into the sun. My mother was next to me, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the camera, her smile practiced and perfect. I zoomed in on my 7-year-old face. I didn't look happy. I looked watchful. I didn't reply. I let the messages pile up like unread mail. A digital testament to their panic. It felt familiar. This push and pull. It was the rhythm of my childhood amplified. Come here. We love you. Go away. You're a nuisance. We are doing this for your own good. You are ruining everything. On the third day, the summons came, not from my parents, but from Ms. Sterling's office. I drove to a nondescript office park on the edge of town. It was not the fortress of Thorne, Callaway, and Associates. It was a sterile, white-walled suite occupied by independent contractors. Mr. Henderson, the forensic document examiner, was waiting for me. He was a small man with glasses so thick they magnified his eyes into owl-like proportions. He did not offer me coffee. He did not offer small talk. He pointed to a chair. I have completed the preliminary analysis of the quitclaim deed. He said, his voice was dry, like rustling paper. He placed a large monitor on the desk between us. On the screen was a high-resolution scan of the signature on the deed, the Lila Reed that had signed away my grandmother's building in 2018. Below it were 3 signatures I had provided from my own records: a student loan application, a lease agreement, and a check I had written for textbooks. Tell me, Mr. Henderson said, when you write your capital L, do you lift the pen? No. I said, it is one motion. He nodded. Look here. He zoomed in on the questioned signature. The line of the L was magnified until the ink looked like a river. At the very top of the loop, there was a tiny, almost invisible blot. This is a hesitation mark, he said. The writer stopped. Their brain had to pause to recall the shape of the next stroke. It is a classic sign of simulation. When we sign our own names, we rely on muscle memory. It is ballistic movement. We do not think about the shape. This writer was thinking about the shape. He clicked a button, and a heat map overlaid the signature. Pressure points, he said. See these red zones? This is where the pen pressed hardest. In your genuine signatures, the pressure is on the downstrokes. It is rhythmic, heavy down, light up. He pointed to the forged signature. This signature has uniform pressure throughout, he said. It was drawn, not written. The hand moved slowly, maintaining an even force to ensure accuracy. It is a drawing of a signature, so I didn't write it. I said, Mr. Henderson looked at me. Mrs. Reed, the probability that you produce this signature is statistically 0, and the probability that it was produced by someone attempting to mimic you is near certain. He handed me a folder. My report is included. It stands up in court. I have testified in 200 cases. I have never been impeached. I took the folder. It felt light, but it carried the weight of a felony. Thank you, I said. I walked out to my car. The sun was shining, which felt wrong. The world should have been gray to match the feeling in my stomach. I had the proof. My parents, my father, most likely, had sat at a desk, practiced my name, and stolen my inheritance. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't a lawyer or an enemy. I texted Chloe, "Meet me, Starbucks on 4th. Alone, please," she replied instantly. OMW. Chloe arrived 15 minutes later. She was wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, looking like a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi, or perhaps just a girl trying to hide from her neighbors. She ordered a complex iced coffee and sat opposite me in a booth in the back corner. She looked tired. Her perfect skin was dull, and she was chewing on her thumbnail. "Dad is losing his mind," she said. She didn't say hello. "He's drinking at 10 in the morning. Mom is just cleaning. She scrubbed the kitchen floor 3 times since yesterday." I put my hands on the table. "Chloe, did you know?" I asked. "Know what?" She took a long sip of her drink, avoiding my eyes. "About the building, about the forgery." She flinched. The straw made a wet, rattling sound. "I didn't know about the signature," she said softly. "I swear, I was in college too. Remember? I wasn't paying attention to the business. But you knew something was wrong." I said. She put the cup down. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Lila," she said, "we always knew you were different." "Different how?" "Different status." She said, "It wasn't something they said out loud. It was just the vibe. Like, I was the investment, and you were the obligation." "The obligation. Why?" I asked. "Why did they treat me like that?" Chloe looked down at the table. "Because they were scared of you," she whispered. "Scared of me?" I laughed. A short, bitter sound. I was the quiet kid who read books in the corner. I was the one who apologized for taking up space. "Not of you, like physically," she said. "They were scared of what you represented. Mom used to tell me, when I was little and I'd ask why you didn't get to go to the private camp or why you had to work summers. She'd say it was for everyone's safety." "Safety?" "She said you were fragile," Chloe said. "She said if we gave you too much, or if we let you think you were one of us, you'd get confused. She said we had to keep boundaries to protect the family." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a myth. They had built a mythology around me. Lila the fragile, Lila the outsider, to justify their theft. They had turned their greed into a moral duty. "Do you believe them?" I asked. Chloe looked at me. She looked at the cheap motel keycard sitting on the table next to my phone. "I don't know," she said. "But Lila, if you take the house, where am I going to go?" I looked at my sister. She was 28 years old, and she was more helpless than I had ever been at 18. They had crippled her too, just in a different way. They had clipped my wings, but they had never taught her to fly. "I don't know." "Chloe," I said, "I really don't know." She stood up. She looked like she wanted to hug me, but she didn't know how to cross the distance. "Just be careful," she said. "Dad is talking to Uncle Marcus." Uncle Marcus was a lawyer. Not a high-powered estate attorney like Mr. Vance, but a zoning lawyer who knew how to bury people in paperwork. I watched her leave. I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly swallowed by the cold reality of what she had said, for everyone's safety. I left the coffee shop and drove to the county library. I needed a computer that wasn't tracked, and I needed quiet. Ms. Sterling had asked me about St. Jude's Specialist Center. I logged on to the library terminal. I pulled up the request portal for vital records. I had authorized the release, but I wanted to see if I could find the public index. I searched for birth announcements in the local paper archives from January 1993. There it was, January 12th, born to Richard and Sarah Reed, but the text was odd. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Reed announced the arrival of a daughter. No name. I cross-referenced it with the hospital admission logs, which were partially digitized for genealogical research. I found an entry for Sarah Reed. Admitted January 11th, discharged January 12th. Procedure: observation, not delivery. Observation. I scrolled down. Patient: Julianne Reed. Admitted January 12th. Discharged January 14th. Procedure. Confidential. My grandmother was in the hospital the day I was born. My mother was there for observation. And then I found the fragment that made my breath hitch. It was a scanned image of a delayed registration memo attached to a batch of birth certificates from that week. It was a procedural note from the county clerk. Read infant. Registration delayed due to custodial affidavit processing. Legal name pending finalization of adoption decree / custodial transfer. Adoption, or custodial transfer. My middle name, Elizabeth, wasn't just an homage, it was a marker. My parents hadn't just changed my name on my school forms. They had been fighting over who I was from the moment I took my first breath, and my grandmother had been there. I printed the page. The librarian looked at me as I retrieved it. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "I am chasing one." I said, "I had one more stop." I drove to the older part of town, to a neighborhood of small, tidy brick houses. I parked in front of a blue house with a well-tended rose garden. Mrs. Alvarez. She had lived next door to my grandmother for 30 years. She was the one who had brought casseroles when grandmother died, but who had been turned away at the door by my father. I knocked. Mrs. Alvarez opened the door. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face softened when she saw me. "Lila," she said, "I was wondering when you would come." "You were?" She opened the door wide. "Come in. The tea is already hot." I sat in her living room, which was crowded with porcelain figurines and smelled of cinnamon. "Did Grandma talk to you?" I asked. "About the trust?" She poured 2 cups. She didn't answer immediately. "Your grandmother was a private woman," Mrs. Alvarez said. "She didn't gossip, but she worried." "What did she worry about?" "She worried about you." "Lila. She used to sit on this porch and watch you play in the yard when your parents brought you over. She used to say, 'They are breaking her spirit so she doesn't learn how to bite.'" I held the warm cup. "Did she say anything about a paper?" I asked. "Or a box?" Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "About 5 years ago, when she started getting sick, she told me, if they ever turn on her, really turn on her, the paper will protect her." She leaned forward. "She told me. I made a shield. Maria, I made a shield out of paper because I couldn't make one out of flesh." I felt the tears then. Hot and fast. She knew. I whispered. "She knew they would try to erase me." Mrs. Alvarez reached over and patted my hand. "She didn't just know. Lila, she planned. She told me that if you ever came asking, I was to tell you one thing." "What?" she said. "Tell Lila that blood is a story we tell ourselves. But truth is, the ink we write it in." I left Mrs. Alvarez's house feeling fortified. I had the forensic report. I had the hospital memo. I had the neighbor's testimony. But my parents had desperation. The call came at 4 in the afternoon. It was Mr. Vance. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "we have a situation." "What happened?" "Your parents have filed an emergency petition in the probate court," he said. "They are seeking an injunction to delay the disclosure of the trust assets and to suspend the powers of the trust protector." "On what grounds?" I asked. He paused. "They are alleging that you are mentally unstable and currently under undue influence. They claim you are suffering from a delusional episode and that your grandmother's trust is being weaponized by me and Ms. Sterling to defraud the family." I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "They are saying I'm crazy?" "It is a common tactic." "Mr. Vance said, "It is called gaslighting by gavel. They want to freeze the process. If they can get a judge to order a psychological evaluation, they can delay the trust activation for months, perhaps years. We have a hearing tomorrow morning." He continued. 9 o'clock. Judge Calloway. No relation to the firm. I hung up, mentally unstable. I sat on the edge of the motel bed. I looked at my hands. They were steady, but the doubt crept in. It was a subtle, slithering thing. Am I unstable? I am living in a motel. I am chasing conspiracy theories about my birth. I am accusing my parents of felonies. If I stood in a courtroom and told this story, the secret box, the forged signature, the invisible abuse. Would I sound like a victim? Or would I sound like a paranoid woman who watched too many movies? That was their power. They controlled the narrative. They had spent 30 years painting me as the odd one, the difficult one, the outsider. All they had to do was point to the picture they had painted and say, "See?" I felt a wave of panic. I felt like I was disappearing. I grabbed my bag. I needed to anchor myself. I drove to an electronics store. I bought a high-quality digital voice recorder. I bought a backup battery. I sat in my car and set it up. I tested it. My name is Lila Reed. Today is Thursday. I am sane. I am real. I am recording this because they are trying to erase me. The sound of my own voice, calm and clear, helped. I started screenshotting every text, every email. I printed them out at the Motel Business Center. I organized them into a binder. If they wanted a war of narratives, I would bring receipts. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of the square. I arrived at 8:30. I wore my black dress, a blazer I had bought at a thrift store, and low heels. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I looked severe. I looked composed. My parents were already there. They were putting on a performance. My mother was wearing a soft gray cardigan and clutching a tissue. She looked frail. My father was holding her arm, looking stoic and protective. They were the picture of grieving parents dealing with a wayward child. They saw me. My mother's face crumpled into a mask of tragic pity. "Lila," she whispered, loud enough for the passing clerks to hear. "Oh, Lila." I didn't stop. I walked past them. I didn't look at them. I met Mr. Vance and Mrs. Sterling outside the courtroom. Ms. Sterling looked ready for battle. "Do not speak unless the judge addresses you directly," she said. "Look at the judge. Do not look at your parents. Do not react to their lies. If you cry, they win. If you shout, they win." "I understand," I said. We entered the courtroom. It was empty except for the bailiff and the clerk. Judge Calloway entered. He was an older man with a face like a dried apple. He looked bored. In the matter of the estate of Julianne Reed, he mumbled, "Petition for emergency injunctive relief. My father's lawyer." Uncle Marcus Dent, stood up. He was a sweaty man with a suit that was too shiny. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here with heavy hearts. My clients, Richard and Sarah Reed, are terrified for their daughter. Since the death of her grandmother, Lila has exhibited erratic, paranoid behavior. She has cut off contact. She has made wild accusations of theft. She has fled the family home to live in a roadside motel." He gestured to me. "We believe she is having a breakdown. We are simply asking the court to pause the trust proceedings, which are complex and confusing for her, until she can receive the medical care she desperately needs. We are asking for a temporary conservatorship over the estate interests." It was a good story. It sounded reasonable. Judge Calloway looked at me. "Ms. Reed," he said, "are you living in a motel?" "Yes, Your Honor." I said. My voice was steady. "Why?" "Because I do not feel safe in my parents' home." I said. Marcus Dent jumped in. "See, Your Honor? Paranoia." Mr. Vance stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "Miss Reed is not paranoid. She is prudent. The petitioners are not concerned for her health. They are concerned for their own liability." He handed a file to the bailiff. "We have submitted a forensic document analysis confirming that Mr. Richard Reed, or someone acting at his direction, forged Miss Reed's signature on a property deed valued at $400,000. The trust in question has activated a penalty clause due to this fraud. The petition before you is not an attempt to save a daughter. It is an attempt to stop an investigation." The judge took the file. He put on his glasses. He looked at the forensic report. He looked at the heat map of the signature. He looked at my father. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, "did you sign this deed?" My father stood up. "Your Honor, it was a family matter. We handle things informally. Lila was away at school. So you signed her name?" the judge asked. It was for the business. My father's voice rose. It was all the same pot of money. The judge took off his glasses. Motion for injunctive relief denied. He said, he looked at me. Ms. Reed, you appear quite lucid to me. He looked at Uncle Marcus. Mr. Dent, if you bring a frivolous petition to my court again to cover up a potential fraud, I will report you to the Bar Association. He banged the gavel. Next case, I walked out of the courtroom. I felt lightheaded. My parents were standing in the hallway. The performance was gone. My father looked murderous. You ungrateful little... he started. I held up my phone. The voice recorder app was running. The red waveform bounced as he spoke. Say it. I said, say it for the record. He clamped his mouth shut. He grabbed my mother's arm and dragged her away. I watched them go. The crack in the facade was visible now. It was running right down the center of their lives. I drove back to the motel. I felt a strange exhaustion. It wasn't over. But the weapon they had used against me for 30 years, my own sanity, had been taken away. I was lying on the bed when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I had won today. I felt brave. Hello? It was a woman's voice, older, raspy. Lila Reed? Yes. You don't know me, the voice said. But I knew your grandmother. I worked at the courthouse with her. Way back. Who is this? That doesn't matter. Listen to me. You won today, but you need to be careful. Careful of what? The law firm, she said. Thorne, Calloway. What about them? Mr. Vance is straight, she said, but the machinery is big. There's a paralegal. Name is Jessica. She's been pulling files on the trust for weeks, way before the death certificate was filed. Why would she do that? Because she dates the operations manager at Reed Logistics, the voice said. She's the leak. Your father knows everything you tell the lawyers before you even leave the parking lot. The line went dead. I sat up. The ice in my veins returned. A person inside the process. That explained how they knew about the waiver timing. That explained how they knew to file the petition today. I opened my laptop. I searched LinkedIn. Jessica Trent, paralegal at Thorne, Calloway, and Associates. I searched her Facebook. It was private, but her profile picture showed her with her arm around a man. I recognized him. He was the guy who ran the warehouse for my father. I called Ms. Sterling. It was late, but she picked up on the first ring. Sterling. It's Lila, I said. I have a name. Jessica Trent. There was a pause. The paralegal on the probate team. Ms. Sterling said, she's dating my father's operations manager. I said, she's the leak. I heard the sound of typing on the other end. Fast, aggressive typing. I see it. Ms. Sterling said. Her login access logs show she accessed the sealed letter of intent file 3 days ago. Did she read it? I asked. My breath caught. Did my parents know? Did they know about the adoption? Was that why they were so desperate to stop the reading? She attempted to open it. Ms. Sterling said, but the file is biometrically locked to my credentials. She couldn't open it, but she saw the metadata. She saw the file size. She saw the tags. What does that mean? It means she told your father that there is a nuclear option in the file. Ms. Sterling said. She told him there is something big. I am locking her out now. Ms. Sterling continued. She will be escorted from the building in the morning. We are going to a secure protocol. No emails, no phone calls, in person only. Come to the office tomorrow at 10, she said. Verification is complete. Is it? I asked. Yes, she said. The forensic report satisfied the identity clause. The judge's ruling satisfied the competency clause. There was a pause. The beneficiary is you, Lila. Officially. I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark motel room. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt rich. I should have felt powerful. I didn't. I felt a deep, shaking relief, like I had just survived a car crash, but beneath it, a new fear was blooming. My father was cornered. He had lost the legal battle. He had lost the narrative battle. He was about to lose his business and his home. People like Richard Reed didn't go down quietly. They didn't accept defeat. They escalated. I checked the lock on the door. I put the chair under the handle. I looked at the voice recorder on the nightstand. The red light blinked in the darkness. An unblinking eye. I was the beneficiary. I was the heir. But I was also the target. The office of Ms. Sterling was quiet. A vacuum sealed against the noise of the outside world. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked with gray grime. I sat in the leather chair, the same one where I had learned the truth of my birth 48 hours ago. Ms. Sterling placed the rest of the sealed letter of intent on the table. She had read the personal revelation, that I was Julianne's daughter, at the last meeting. Now, she was reading the strategy. I knew that if I acknowledged you fully as my heir while I was alive, my grandmother's handwriting flowed across the page. Richard and Sarah would have found a way to bleed you dry. They would have used your guilt, your desire for connection, and your youth to coerce you into signing over your future. They are consumers. Lila, they consume people. I traced the line of ink with my finger, so I made a terrible choice. I allowed you to be the outsider. I allowed them to push you to the margins. I knew that as long as they thought you were worthless, they would ignore you. And while they ignored you, I could build this trust. I could fill it with the assets they thought they owned. I let them play house in my properties. But I kept the deeds here, in the dark, waiting for you to be strong enough to turn on the lights. It was a strategy of brutal pragmatism. She had sacrificed my childhood happiness to ensure my adult freedom. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but it faded quickly into a dull ache. She had been right. If I had known at 18 that I was worth millions, my father would have guilted me into investing in his failing logistics company. I would be broke today. Ms. Sterling closed the file. Do you understand the scope of the assets? She asked. The house and the building. I said, it is more than that, she said. She opened a spreadsheet on her laptop and turned the screen toward me. The Julian V. Reed Trust holds the master lease on the land under Reed Logistics. It holds the note on the equipment loans your father took out in 2010. It holds the majority voting shares in the family holding company, which were placed in a blind trust structure 20 years ago. She pointed to a column of numbers. Your parents do not own their business. Lila, they manage it. The trust owns it. And the trust documents state that upon confirmation of the beneficiary, all management agreements are subject to immediate review and termination. I stared at the screen. They work for me. I said, technically, yes, she said. And because they have defaulted on the moral clauses, by forging your signature and attempting to defraud the estate, the trust has the automatic right to seize control of operations. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a hostile takeover from the grave. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from my father. We need to meet. Neutral ground. The coffee shop on Main. 1 hour. Please, Lila. For the family. I looked at Ms. Sterling. Go, she said. But take nothing, sign nothing, and remember who holds the cards. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. I ordered a black tea and sat in a booth near the door. I wanted an exit route. My parents arrived together. They looked diminished. My father was unshaven, which I had never seen in my life. My mother wore sunglasses indoors. They sat opposite me. Lila, my mother said. Her voice was trembling. I didn't say anything. I just watched them. We want to end this, my father said. He put his hands on the table. They were shaking. This legal war. It's going to destroy us all. The lawyers are the only ones winning. What do you propose? I asked. A clean payout, he said. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a single sheet, typed on his home printer. We will give you $500,000. He said, cash. We will liquidate the vacation cabin. We will take out a second mortgage on the house, if the trust releases the lien. And in exchange? I asked. In exchange, you sign a confidentiality agreement, he said. You agree to seal the trust documents forever, and, he paused, and you issue a joint statement with us. saying that the trust was a misunderstanding, that the heir language was metaphorical, that we are a united family. I looked at the paper. $500,000. It was a fortune to the Lila of last week, to the Lila who lived in a motel. It was an insult. You want me to lie? I said, you want me to tell the world that I am not Julianne's daughter. You want me to go back to being the niece you tolerated. It's for the best, my mother whispered. Lila, think of the scandal. If people find out about the adoption, about the forgery, we will be pariahs. You should have thought of that before you forged my signature. I said, that was a mistake, my father hissed. I was trying to save the business that feeds you, the business that I own. I corrected. His face went purple. You don't know the first thing about logistics. You're a shipping clerk. I am a senior logistics manager. I said, and I know enough to know that you don't transfer a prime asset to a shell company for $10 unless you are hiding insolvency. I pushed the paper back to him. No deal. Lila, please, my mother begged. She reached for my hand. I pulled it away. What do you want? We can go higher. 700,000? I don't want your money. I said, I want 3 things. I held up 3 fingers. 1, an independent forensic accounting of every dime the business has made since 2005. My father went pale. 2, the immediate return of the commercial building to the trust, with back rent paid for the years you used it rent-free. 3, I said, looking my mother in the eye, a public correction. A what? She asked. You gather the extended family, Aunt Marge, the cousins, everyone you told that I was not real family, and you tell them the truth. You tell them who I am. You tell them I am the heir, and you apologize. My father laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. You want us to humiliate ourselves? He asked. I want you to tell the truth. I said, if the truth is humiliating, that is your problem. We will never do that, he said. Never. Then the trust proceeds. I said, I stood up. My father stood up too. He leaned over the table. You think you have won, he said, but you live in this town. Lila. You think people will side with the greedy girl who stole from her grieving parents? We have lived here for 40 years. We know everyone. You are nobody. I am the landlady. I said. I walked out. The war started 2 hours later. It began with a text from a girl I had gone to high school with, someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Hey Lila, I heard about what you're doing to your parents. I know grief makes us crazy, but trying to take their house? That's really low. Then another, my mom says you're suing your parents for back rent? After everything they did for you? My parents were working the phones. They were spinning the narrative. Poor Richard and Sarah. Their ungrateful, unstable daughter is capitalizing on a technicality in the will to destroy them. It was a smart play. In Oakhaven, reputation was currency. Being family-oriented was the highest virtue. Suing your family was a cardinal sin. I went to the grocery store to buy water. The cashier, a woman who had known me since I was 10, didn't make eye contact. She scanned my items in silence. When I said thank you, she turned to the next customer. I felt the isolation wrapping around me like a cold fog. I was right, but I was alone. The next morning, the war moved to a new front. I was working remotely from the motel, trying to focus on a shipping manifest for my actual job. My phone rang. It was the HR director of my company. Lila, do you have a minute? She asked. Her voice was formal. Sure. Carol, what's up? We received a complaint this morning. She said, through the anonymous ethics hotline. My stomach dropped. What kind of complaint? The caller alleged that you are using company resources, specifically our proprietary shipping software, to conduct private forensic audits on a competitor. They also allege that you are currently the subject of a fraud investigation in your hometown. I closed my eyes. Competitor. My father's business was technically a competitor, though a much smaller one. Carol, I said, keeping my voice steady, this is retaliation. I am currently the beneficiary of a trust that owns a logistics company. My family is disputing the inheritance. They are trying to pressure me. It's messy. Lila, She said, "The board hates messy. If there is a fraud investigation, there is no fraud investigation against me." I said, "I am the victim of the fraud. I have a forensic report proving my signature was forged by the accusers. I can send you the report." I added quickly, "And the contact information for the trust attorney. Please do," she said. "Until we clear this up, I have to place you on administrative leave, paid. But your access to the system is suspended." "I understand," I said. I hung up. I sat in the chair and shook. They had come for my job. It was the only thing I had that was truly mine. They knew that. They knew that without my salary, I couldn't pay for the motel, couldn't pay for gas. They were trying to starve me out. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. I drafted an email to Carol. I attached the forensic report, the letter from Mr. Vance, and a notarized affidavit stating that the ethics complaint was a harassment tactic connected to civil litigation. I hit send, then I called Ms. Sterling. "They are attacking my livelihood." I said, "I know." She said, "I received a notification that your father attempted to transfer $50,000 from the business operating account to a personal account this morning. Did it go through?" "No." She said, "I froze it. And because of that attempt, I have accelerated the enforcement." "What does that mean?" "It means I have sent demand letters to every bank, vendor, and client associated with Reed Logistics. I have informed them that the ownership of the company is in dispute and that the current management is under investigation for fiduciary breach." "You locked the accounts?" "I locked everything," she said. "They cannot buy fuel. They cannot pay drivers. They cannot buy a paperclip without my countersignature. They will blame me." I said, "They are already blaming you." She said, "But now they are broke." That evening, the knock on my motel door was soft, hesitant. I looked through the peephole. It was Chloe. I opened the door. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unwashed. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked around the small, shabby room. "Dad says you froze the accounts," she said. "He says the trucks are stuck in the yard. The drivers are quitting. He tried to steal $50,000. I said, "The trust protected itself." Chloe put her face in her hands. "He promised me," she sobbed. "What did he promise you?" "He told me, years ago, that if I stuck with them, if I helped them manage you, that I would get everything. The house, the business. He said you were the mistake, and I was the plan." She looked up at me. Her face was a mask of misery and entitlement. "He said I just had to keep you in your place," she said. "He said, make sure Lila knows she's lucky to be here." So I did. I was mean to you, Lila. I treated you like dirt because I thought that was my job. I thought that was how I earned my inheritance. I looked at my sister, my niece. She hadn't just been a brat. She had been an employee. Her job was to suppress me. "And now?" I asked. "Now he says there's nothing left." She said, "He says you took it all. He told me to come here and beg you. He said, 'Go cry to your sister. Make her feel guilty.'" She started crying harder. "But I'm not crying because he told me to. I'm crying because I don't know how to do anything else. I'm 28, and I have never paid a bill. I don't know how to be a person." Lila. I sat down next to her. I didn't hug her. I wasn't ready for that. "You are going to have to learn." "Chloe," I said. She nodded. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "Dad, he's going to lie at the meeting tomorrow. He says he has a plan." "What plan?" "He says he's going to say the letter is a fake. He says he's going to say you forged it. He says he'd rather burn the house down than let you have it." I felt a cold calm settle over me. "Let him try," I said. The final disclosure meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10. This was the deadline. The trust document stated that the beneficiary had to be accepted by all named parties, or the truth trigger would activate. I met with Ms. Sterling an hour before. "Explain the trigger to me again," I said. "Ms." Sterling placed a heavy sealed box on the table. "This box contains the evidence packet." She said, "It holds the original adoption decree, the sworn affidavits from the nurses at St. Jude's, the unredacted hospital logs, and most importantly, a deposition your grandmother gave on video 3 days before she died. Video? I asked. Yes, in it. She details the abuse. She details the financial manipulation. She names your father as a predator. And if the trigger fires? If any party denies the beneficiary's status at the final meeting, Ms. Sterling said, this packet is automatically released via courier and secure email to a designated list. Who is on the list? The State Attorney General, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the Ethics Board of the local Chamber of Commerce, the bank holding the mortgage on the house, and the local newspaper. I stared at the box. It was a nuclear bomb. It wouldn't just strip them of the money. It would send them to prison. It would destroy their reputation so thoroughly that they would never be able to show their faces in this town again. They don't know about this, do they? I asked. No. Ms. Sterling said, they know there are consequences, but they do not know the severity. They think they are fighting a civil suit. They do not realize they are standing on a trapdoor to criminal court. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city. I thought about my father's threat. I'd rather burn the house down. He couldn't admit the truth. If he admitted I was the heir. He admitted he was a thief. If he admitted I was Julianne's daughter. He admitted he was a liar. His entire identity, the successful businessman, the patriarch, was built on the suppression of who I was. He would deny me. I knew it in my bones. And if I let the trigger fire, I would destroy him. Lila? Ms. Sterling said gently, you can stop it. You can accept their denial. You can take the assets without their acknowledgement. Fight them in court for years, and keep the evidence sealed. You can spare them the prison time. I thought about the not real family comments. I thought about the responsibility tax I paid at 16. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about Chloe, trained to be a warden. I thought about the anonymous ethics complaint trying to get me fired. They hadn't spared me. They had tried to erase me. I turned back to the table. No, I said. I looked at the box. If they lie today, I said, let it burn. The boardroom was full. This time, it wasn't just the immediate family. The trust required the presence of key stakeholders for the final reading. My father's business partner, a man named Gary, was there. The family accountant was there. Even Dave, Chloe's husband, was there, looking terrified. My parents sat at the far end. My father looked manic. His eyes were darting around the room. My mother looked sedated. Ms. Sterling stood at the head of the table. I sat to her right. We are here for the final disclosure of the Julianne V. Reed Trust, Ms. Sterling announced. She opened the file. Based on forensic evidence, identity verification, and the sealed letter of intent, the trust has determined that the sole beneficiary and controlling party of all assets is Miss Lila Elizabeth Reed. She looked at my father. Mr. Reed, as the former executor of the visible estate, do you acknowledge this determination? The room went silent. My father stood up. He adjusted his suit jacket. He looked at Gary. He looked at the accountant. He was playing to the audience. I do not, he said loudly. Ms. Sterling didn't blink. Mr. Reed, I must warn you, the trust contains an automatic enforcement clause regarding denial of status. My father sneered. Your clauses don't scare me. This entire process is a sham. That letter is a forgery. Lila Reed is a disturbed young woman who is being manipulated by this firm to steal my mother's legacy. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is not the heir. She is not real family. She is a charity case we took in. There it was, the line. I looked at him. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, cold pity. He was digging his own grave with his mouth. Is that your final statement for the record? Ms. Sterling asked. It is, my father said. I deny her status. I deny the trust. And I will fight this in every court in the state. Ms. Sterling looked at me. She was waiting for me to signal. I could stop it. I could ask for a recess. I could save him. I looked at the man who had forged my name. I looked at the mother who had let him. I thought about the grandmother who had to hide her love in a box to keep me safe. I looked at Ms. Sterling. "Proceed," I said. "Ms." Sterling nodded. She turned to her laptop. She pressed a single key. "The truth trigger has been activated," she announced. "What?" my father asked. "What does that mean?" "It means, Ms." Sterling said, looking at him with zero emotion, "that the full evidentiary packet, including the video deposition of Julianne Reed naming you as her abuser and financial predator, and the proof of your forgery, has just been sent to the district attorney, the IRS, and the Oak Haven Gazette." My father's face went white. "You're bluffing," he whispered. "Ms." Sterling pointed to the door. "I believe the courier has just arrived at the bank." She said, "Your loans are being called in. Mr. Reed." Immediately, the phone in the accountant's pocket started ringing. Then Gary's phone. Then my father's. It was a chorus of ringtones, the sound of a life collapsing. My father looked at his phone. He looked at me. "Lila," he gasped. "What have you done?" I stood up. I picked up my bag. "I didn't do anything, Dad," I said. "I just let you speak." I walked toward the door. "Wait," my mother screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "Lila, stop it. Call them back. We can fix this. We can say it was a mistake. It's too late for mistakes," I said. I walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard Gary shouting at my father. I heard my mother wailing. I heard the sound of the family facade shattering into a million pieces. I walked down the hallway. "Mr. Vance was waiting by the elevator." "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Where will you go?" "I'm going to go to the house," I said. "My parents' house?" "My house," I corrected. "I'm going to change the locks." I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the noise of the destruction I had unleashed. I was alone. I was an orphan in every way that mattered. But as the elevator descended, I felt the weight lifting. The lie was dead. I was real. The boardroom was not just occupied by lawyers this time. It was a theater. And every seat was filled. Ms. Sterling had insisted on the guest list. She cited a clause in the trust regarding witnesses to the lineage, which meant that for the final disclosure to be binding, it had to be heard by the people who constituted the social fabric of the Reed family. My father's business partner, Gary, was there, wearing a suit that looked too tight across the shoulders. He looked uncomfortable, tapping a gold pen against his notebook. Next to him sat Mr. Henderson, the family accountant for 30 years, a man who knew where every skeleton was buried because he had filed the tax returns for the graveyards. But it was the others who made the air feel thin. Aunt Marge was there, my father's older sister, the matriarch of the extended clan, who had always looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She sat with her purse clutched in her lap, her eyes darting between my parents and me. Dave, my sister's husband, sat next to Chloe. He looked nauseous. And in the corner, a representative from the bank that held the mortgage on the Reed family home and the business loans. He was there because Ms. Sterling had notified the bank that the collateral for their loans was subject to a title dispute. I sat at the right hand of Miss Sterling. I wore white. It was a conscious choice. I wanted to look like a ghost. My parents sat on the opposite side. My father, Richard, looked energized, almost manic. He had convinced himself that this was a negotiation he could win. He was whispering to Uncle Marcus, his zoning lawyer, who looked out of his depth. My mother, Sarah, was staring at the polished wood of the table. She looked like she was praying. Ms. Sterling stood up. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the soft scratching of the court reporter's stenography machine. "We are here for the formal reading of the beneficiary determination regarding the Julianne V. Reed Irrevocable Trust," Ms. Sterling said. She did not use a microphone, but her voice carried to every corner of the room. "This trust has been in a dormant state for 25 years. It was designed to activate only upon the satisfaction of specific conditions, all of which have now been met." She opened the heavy leather folio. I watched her hands. They were steady. I looked down at my own hands, folded in my lap. They were shaking. A fine, tremors-like vibration that traveled up my wrists. I clamped my hands between my knees to stop it. I was not triumphant. I was terrified. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my own life. Ms. Sterling began to read. Based on a review of the original instrument, the sworn affidavits of the medical staff at St. Jude's Specialist Center, the DNA verification protocols, and the sealed letter of intent provided by the grantor. She paused. She looked directly at Aunt Marge, then at Gary, then at the banker. It is the formal determination of the trust protector that the sole beneficiary and controlling party of all trust assets is Ms. Lila Elizabeth Reed, the biological daughter of Julianne Reed and the only designated heir to the estate. A ripple went through the room. Aunt Marge gasped. She put a hand to her throat. "Lila?" she whispered. "Julianne's daughter?" Gary stopped tapping his pen. He looked at my father with wide, shocked eyes. Ms. Sterling continued, "This determination grants Ms. Lila Reed immediate and total control over the following assets: the residential property located at 44 Oak Lane, the commercial property located at 120 Main Street, and the controlling majority interest in Reed Logistics, LLC, currently managed by Richard Reed." My father stood up. He didn't just stand. He launched himself from his chair. "Objection!" he shouted. Uncle Marcus pulled at his sleeve. "Richard, sit down. This isn't a court. I don't care what it is," my father yelled. He pointed a finger at Ms. Sterling, then at me. "This is a farce. That determination is based on lies. Lila is confused. She has always been confused." He looked at Gary. He looked at Aunt Marge. He was appealing to the jury of his peers. "You all know her," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial. "Reasonable tone, you know Lila. She's unstable. She's been struggling for years. We took her in. We raised her. We gave her a home when she had nothing." He leaned over the table, his face twisting into a sneer I knew better than my own reflection. "She is not the heir," he spat, "and she is certainly not real family." The phrase hung in the air. Not real family. He had said it. He had said the words that were written into the trigger clause. Miss Sterling did not argue. She did not shout back. She simply looked at the court reporter. "Did you capture that statement?" she asked. The court reporter nodded. "Verbatim, ma'am." Ms. Sterling turned back to my father. "Mr. Reed, you have just formally denied the beneficiary status of the heir in the presence of witnesses, after being presented with the determination." "So?" my father challenged. "I deny it because it's false." Ms. Sterling reached for a large red file box that sat on the credenza behind her. She placed it on the table with a heavy thud. "By denying the beneficiary, you have activated the truth trigger enforcement mechanism contained in Clause 12 of the trust," she said. She opened the box. "This mechanism requires the immediate release of the evidentiary packet to all stakeholders, regulatory bodies, and legal authorities." She pulled out a stack of thick, bound documents. She signaled to the junior associates who were standing by the door. They stepped forward and began distributing copies of the packet to everyone in the room. Gary got one, the accountant got one, the banker got one, Aunt Marge got one. "What is this?" my father demanded. Ms. Sterling picked up her copy. "This is the history of your conduct." "Richard," she said. She opened the first page. Item 1. She read, "A notarized affidavit from attorney Thomas Clark, dated 25 years ago. Mr. Clark was your mother's previous lawyer." She looked at the room. "In this affidavit, Mr. Clark details a meeting with Richard and Sarah Reed regarding the establishment of the trust. During this meeting, Richard Reed attempted to persuade Mr. Clark to substitute the name of the beneficiary. He attempted to replace Lila Elizabeth Reed with Chloe Ann Reed, who was 3 years old at the time. Chloe made a small, strangled sound. Ms. Sterling continued, "When Mr. Clark refused, stating that Julianne's intent was clear. Richard Reed threatened to have him disbarred. He stated, and this is a direct quote from the sworn statement, "The girl is a mistake. We need the money for the real child." Aunt Marge looked at my father. "Richard?" she asked. Her voice was trembling. "You tried to swap them?" My father's face was the color of ash. "That's a lie," he rasped. "That lawyer was a drunk. Ms. Sterling turned the page. "Item 2, she announced. A forensic analysis of a quitclaim deed dated November 14th, 2018. This deed purported to transfer the commercial building from Julianne Reed to R.J. Ventures for $10. She held up the heat map of the forged signature. The analysis confirms that the witness signature of Lila Reed is a forgery, likely produced by a tracing method. This document is currently attached to a criminal referral for fraud and grand larceny which has, as of this morning, been filed with the district attorney." The banker stood up. He was looking at the document with horror. "Mr. Reed," the banker said, his voice cold, "did you use a forged asset as collateral for the restructuring loan in 2019? My father didn't answer. He was staring at the red box. "Ms. Sterling turned to the final tab. "Item 3, she said, a handwritten letter from Julianne Reed, dated 2 months before her death. She read it aloud. "If this packet has been opened, it means my son has tried to destroy Lila one last time. It means he has pressured her to sign away her rights. If Lila is ever coerced, if she is ever told she does not belong, know this. The manipulation has begun. Richard and Sarah have used my money to build a facade of success, but they have built it on the back of a child they swore to protect. Ms. Sterling closed the file. The room was deadly silent. It was the silence of a funeral. But it wasn't the grandmother we were burying. It was the reputation of Richard and Sarah Reed. Aunt Marge stood up slowly. She walked over to where my father was sitting. She looked down at him. "You told us she was difficult," Marge said quietly. "You told us she was ungrateful. You told us she wouldn't come to Christmas because she didn't like us." "She didn't," my father stammered. "She was always distant. Because you pushed her away," Marge shouted. Her voice cracked. "You pushed her away so you could steal her birthright." She turned to my mother. "And you?" Marge said, "You let him. You acted like the martyr. Poor Sarah, raising the difficult child. And all the while you were robbing her." My mother put her head on the table and began to sob. It wasn't a sympathetic sound. It was the sound of someone realizing the audience had left the theater. "Ms. Sterling turned to me. "Ms. Reed," she said, "the floor is yours." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my hands had stopped shaking. I looked around the room. I looked at Gary, who was furiously texting on his phone, probably trying to distance his own assets from my father's imploding company. I looked at the accountant, who was sweating. I looked at Dave, who was holding Chloe's hand, and I looked at my parents. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the need to gloat. The truth was doing the work for me. "I just want to say one thing," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence, it carried. I looked at Aunt Marge. All my life, I tried to figure out what was wrong with me. I said, I tried to figure out why I was the guest, why I had to knock before entering a room in my own house, why I had to pay rent at 16. I took a breath. I thought I had to earn my place. I said, I thought if I worked harder, or stayed quieter, or signed whatever papers you put in front of me, that eventually, I would be real family. I looked at my father. He was slumped in his chair, defeated, but I was already family. I said, I was the only one who didn't need to steal to belong. I picked up the copy of the trust determination. I am done negotiating for basic respect. I said, the business is now under the control of the trust. The house is under the control of the trust. You have 30 days to vacate both. Chloe stood up. She looked desperate. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Lila, please, she cried. You can't do this. We're still family. You can't just kick us out on the street. I looked at my sister, the girl who had admitted to me, in the motel room, that her kindness was just another transaction. We are family. Chloe, I said, that is a biological fact. But family isn't a title you use to extract obedience. It isn't a word you use to make people shut up when you are hurting them. I looked at her, and I felt a great distance opening up between us, wider than the table. Family is behavior, I said, and based on your behavior, I am choosing to be a stranger. The room erupted. My father lunged across the table. He didn't reach me. Dave and Gary grabbed him, but he screamed, "You ungrateful witch! I gave you life. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing," I shouted back, my voice finally rising. "You gave me a bill. You charged me for my existence." My mother stood up, wiping her face. She tried a different tactic. She walked around the table, her arms open, approaching me. "Lila, baby," she wailed. "Don't listen to him. He's upset. We can work this out. Just you and me. We can share. We can be a team." I stepped back. I put up a hand. "Do not touch me." I said. She stopped. She looked at Ms. Sterling, then at the banker. "We can fix this," she said to the banker. "It's a misunderstanding. We can refinance." The banker shook his head. "Mrs. Reed, I am declaring the loans in default. I am seizing the accounts. You need a criminal defense attorney, not a loan officer." My father was struggling against Gary's grip. "I'll burn it down," he screamed. "I'll burn the trucks. You won't get a dime." Ms. Sterling nodded to the security guards by the door. "Escort Mr. and Mrs. Reed from the building," she said, "and notify the police that a threat has been made against the assets." The guards moved in. They took my father by the arms. He was still shouting, a stream of profanity and desperation. My mother was wailing, a high, keen sound that made my teeth ache. They were dragged out of the room. The heavy doors closed behind them, cutting off the noise. The silence that followed was ringing. Gary cleared his throat. He looked at me. He looked terrified. "Ms. Reed," he said, "Lila, about the operations." I had no idea. I swear, I just handled the logistics. I looked at him. He was a survivor. He would pivot. "We will talk on Monday." "Gary," I said, "until then, nothing moves without my signature." He nodded vigorously. Of course, of course." I looked at Aunt Marge. She was crying quietly. "I didn't know." "Lila," she whispered, "I really didn't know." "I believe you," I said. I turned to Ms. Sterling. "Are we done?" I asked. Ms. Sterling closed the folio. She looked at me with something that looked like pride. "We are done," she said. "Verification is complete. The estate is settled." I picked up my bag. I didn't look back at the empty chairs where my parents had sat. I didn't look at Chloe, who was sitting with her head in her hands. I walked to the door. "Mr. Vance opened it for me." We walked to the elevator in silence. The hallway was empty. My parents were gone, escorted out of the building and out of my life. We stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut. I leaned against the wall. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 25 years. "Are you all right?" "Mister?" Vance asked. I looked at the floor indicator numbers changing. 10, 9, 8. I don't have parents anymore. I said, "Ms. Sterling adjusted her glasses. "You never did." "Lila," she said gently, "you had captors. Today. You just unlocked the door." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. The sun was shining outside. It was bright and harsh and real. I walked out of the building. I walked toward my car. I had a lot to do. I had to change locks. I had to hire a forensic accountant. I had to learn how to run a logistics company, but for the first time, the future didn't look like a debt I had to pay. It looked like an asset I owned. I took the keys out of my pocket. I unlocked my car. I sat in the driver's seat and looked in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at me was the same one I had seen every day for 33 years. But the eyes were different. The fear was gone. I started the engine. I put the car in gear, and I drove away, leaving the Reeds in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until they were nothing but dust. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a long journey for Lila to find her voice, and I hope you felt every moment of her vindication. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come out, please hit that subscribe button for revenge stories. We have many more tales of justice, family secrets, and dramatic reveals coming your way. And please, share your thoughts in English in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Lila's shoes? Would you have let the trigger fire? See you in the next story.